Welcome to the New Creation Fellowship Church worship for September 5, 2021. Now this happens to be Labor Day weekend, and I know that many of us are traveling this weekend, myself included. So wherever you may be this morning, in our sanctuary, at home, camping, or anywhere else that you have decided to travel this weekend, blessings to you this day. I'm grateful that you decided to worship with New Creation today and trust that God's love surrounds you. It is my prayer that you know and believe that you are a beloved child of God, created in the image of God. Our Creator God delights in you. At New Creation, we seek to celebrate our differences as gifts and blessings. Our differences in color, gender, sexual orientation, and the many, many other ways that we are categorized by the world. You are welcome in our worship as we journey together, discerning how to follow Jesus more faithfully. There's so much that I think of as we light our peace lamp this morning. From continued cries for justice, to those affected by wildfires and other natural disasters, to living in a pandemic and difficult realities that still exist from that, and the continued violence that we commit against the earth. And there is so much more. Specifically, though, my thoughts this morning are with those who live in Afghanistan, in particular with the women and the girls of that country who have the most to lose. I pray that we may find more creative methods of being involved in Afghanistan than we have in the past, as we advocate for the dignity and the rights of those who live there. I also think of the devastation of Hurricane Ida, specifically in Louisiana and Mississippi. Our indifference to the care of creation has intensified these storms, and our continued indifference will lead to even greater intensification of these storms. Oh God, hear us. Oh God, forgive us. I pray that the peace of Christ would shine, and that peace would be felt in very tangible ways where there has been no peace. Oh God, hear us. Let's take a moment to center our hearts and our thoughts as we listen to our meditative music this morning from Michelle. I invite you to join me for our call to worship. The words will be on the screen. We gather as pilgrims on a journey of faith. We come seeking the cloud of your presence as we travel the way. We come seeking your pillar of fire to light our darkness. Shine in our hearts, O God, with the light of your love. Make your presence known through Jesus. Amen. Hello, friends. I want to talk to you about something that I saw this week. I saw it on a sports show that I was watching, and I'm going to show a video of this to you here in just a second. But it's of the Paralympics, and it is of sprinters who are blind. And blind sprinters can't see where they're going, right? And so they are tethered by their wrist to a guide, somebody who runs along with them. And my understanding in terms of the rules of this is that the guide cannot pull them, and that the actual the blind sprinter needs to cross the finish line first before the guide does. So watch these short little clips here of the Paralympic sprinting.
David Brown, the reigning world champion, goes in lane 3 alongside Jerome Avery, the former international sprinter for the United States.
I ran with him our first practice. Coach immediately said, "You're going to run with him after me." And, you know, the rest has been history.
There you go. Drive. Stay in tight.
Running with Jerome, I don't have to worry about going out too far. All I have to focus on is just listening to him.
Get up. Nice.
Arm action should be exact. We should be hitting the ground at the same time.
This time they're away, and Brown gets away very, very well indeed.
When you see us run, we're like one person.
It should look like one person running.
That's the
That tracking side on camera is magic to watch because it just shows that they were running almost like one person.
So I don't know about you, but I just find this fascinating. I love that the two people, when they are working best together, are working as one, that their feet are hitting at the same time, their arms are striding at the same time. There's a place in the video where you can see the blind athlete kind of lean into the guide. I mean, he leans a little bit so he kind of feels him as they sprint down the track together. And I love the teamwork that happens there. And I think that for the church, those sorts of things can happen too. And in our lives, we all need those people to run our race along with us, to be, stride by stride, step by step, to be with us all the way. And one of the places we can find those people is the church. And it is, I have found that at New Creation, and I see that at New Creation as people journey along together as they run this race together. And so I am so grateful for that. And in the midst of that, in our service today, we have Sophia doing our meditative music. And we have Marvin Penner bringing us our message today. And so this running alongside of each other can happen across ages, can happen across from the youngest to the oldest. And I'm just so grateful for a community where we look to do that together. Thank you, friends. It's good to see you today. Good to talk with you. Have a great day. Bye.
2 Corinthians 9, 6 through 8. Keep this in mind. If you plant sparingly, you will reap sparingly. And if you plant bountifully, you will reap bountifully. You must give according to what you have inwardly decided, not sadly, not reluctantly, for God loves a giver who gives cheerfully. There are no limits to the grace of God, who will make sure you will always have enough of everything, and even a surplus for good works. 2 Timothy 1:7. For God didn't give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, of love, of self-discipline.
This morning, for our sermon time, we have the honor to sit and privilege to sit and talk with Marvin here. And I'm really looking forward to this time that we have this opportunity to hear from Marvin. And Mitch is over here beside Marvin from Everence. You know who Mitch Stutzman is. He has been with us many times. But Mitch is going to tell us why he is here and what is kind of led to why we are having this conversation with Marvin.
Yeah, so every year, Everence corporate-wide gets to recognize folks in our communities that live lives of holistic stewardship, that we want to recognize for the commitment that they have to making stewardship a way of life. And Marvin was one of the persons across the country nominated to receive that award and received it this year, the Regional Journey Award for this part of the country. And that's part of the reason why Derrick and I started talking together about how we might ask Marvin to talk more about just how he has lived into that life of stewardship and how he has made stewardship a way of life, and to glean some of your wisdom, right, Marvin? So, but that whole thing around the Journey Award and recognizing folks for a life dedicated to stewardship has a lot to do with a person's relationship to and the way they treat their financial resources. And so to start our conversation rolling, Marvin, I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of your first memories of money as a part of your formation.
Well, thank you, first of all, for including me in this recognition. I'm somewhat set back by the fact that I'm being recognized. My experience has been a journey of stewardship, particularly in the last 15 to 20 years, when I left the farm and became more involved with Everence. And as you know, I worked for Everence for 11 years before retiring, and now I've been retired longer than I've ever worked anywhere. And so the experience of the Journey Award is exactly significant because it is a journey. And I think whether you're 8 or 80 and part of this congregation and part of our church community, we need to understand that what we're doing in the way of life, what we're expected to do in our journey is constantly learning of new ways we can support and be part of community, be part of what we can do and how that best fits. Your question is, what were my first observations in reference to that would take me back to my childhood. And that's been almost longer than I can remember. However, I do recall my parents being very adamant about treats and how we could not necessarily always participate in activities where we would spend additional money to be considered a treat. One specific example was when we had ball teams, church league. Every Friday evening, there were a number of us who were involved in a impromptu church league, and invariably everyone went to Dairy Queen after the experience. However, my parents were adamant, and I had two brothers at that point that were involved as well as myself, and they were adamant that no, we do not stop at Dairy Queen. We go home, and if you're hungry, you can eat ice cream at home. Or another expression was, well, if you need something, you can eat a cheese bread. And that was sort of denying oneself, and I think that's carried to some extent through my experience during my lifetime. Also in 1980, I had a brain tumor that was removed surgically. Fortunately, it was benign, and we were living on the farm at the time. It was a very stressful time for me. And our son Larry was about 10 at that point. And one afternoon, while I was recuperating from the surgery, we were in town, and I suggested we stop at Dairy Queen. And Larry promptly turned to his mother and said, "What happened, Mom? Did they give Dad a whole new brain?" Because it was so out of character for me, because I had learned that from my parents, to be that generous and considering going out and eating at that point. Now, things are much different today. It's 50 years later, and we understand that families' dynamics are completely different. I'm not recommending that as a mode for others, but it's something that was in my experience. My second memory of around finance and money happened because of two neighbors, or two friends, I should say, who were members of our church congregation in Beatrice, Nebraska. One of them was a prominent businessman, and another one was a very good but small bachelor farmer. And these two gentlemen, I had learned later at some point that they had been audited twice for making too many contributions to charity. And these two gentlemen I tried to emulate. And I think it's hard to know what is right, but this has been a privilege of Ruth and I to be able to be somewhat generous with our contributions, and from a financial standpoint, and I'll talk a little later more about why and how that all worked.
Yeah. So Marvin, I have experienced you to be a very generous individual. From meeting you at Mojo's coffee house and you never letting me buy my own coffee, to more substantial donations that I know you have given other places that most people have no idea that you've given because you don't publicize that about yourself. But I'm aware of them. So I'm curious, what inspires your generosity to live so open-handedly with your finances?
Well, I think there are several things. there's been ups and downs in our lives, just like there's in everyone's life. And we're still not through life, and we'll still experience more ups and downs. But the strength of family is paramount. I have loving siblings, and I have loving parents, and I have loving children, and I have loving grandchildren. And as an 80-year-old, I can't think of anything more inspirational than that. Yeah. And the second thing is I had good teachings by examples of others. And when we were in Nebraska particularly, I recall, it's happened other places too, but when we were in Nebraska, we had many examples of people who went above and beyond their ability to give. And invariably, there were blessings that came with that as they considered making those helping in other ways, not just financial. But that's paramount. Also, I had good counsel, and many times we need to look and seek counsel. And I had people when we were on the farm who I relied on for counsel. There were people who I rely on now for counsel. These people know who they are, and I'm free, and they're willing to listen to me at any time. And I think sometimes when we have challenges or hardships or disappointments, we tend to isolate ourselves. And the huge part of being charitable and being generous is don't hide ourselves from others. Find and seek good, trusted counselors. And I think that's paramount to some of the ideas that I've dealt with. Take off my glasses to read. And I need to emphasize that having family support and having my wife, Ruth, and my children now, it's just unbelievably important. And some of you know we're going through some challenges, but we'll make it. And it's not in isolation. We rely on the community, we rely on friends, we rely on God to guide us. And I always looking for ways to help others with time, with my talent, or with money. And even though I might mention at this point that we've been very fortunate, and I have no longer involved with making my financial success important. I've turned that all over to my son, and but my and Ruth's choices are still what charities we want to contribute to. I maintain that as a priority, and that's all I got to do is figure out where I'm going to give some money. And Ruth helps me with that, probably to a little lesser extent now, but it's a joint venture.
You've talked some in your story so far about specific choices you've made or counsel that you've sought, and that counsel informing new decisions that you've made, and all of these decisions that have created this lifestyle that you've adopted is of course leading to something, some ultimate goal. So how would you identify what that ultimate goal in your life is, and how these choices that you've made are pursuing that ultimate goal?
Well, it's boiled down in two simple sentences. try to stay simple if I can. Bring happiness to others, and not only happiness, that's maybe not quite the right word, but satisfaction or help, to be helpful, and in turn that brings contentment and or happiness to myself and my family. I think if we seek to serve those others ahead of ourselves, we've got it right. And our culture, our society is not geared that way. We're geared toward what can I buy, what can I get, what new gadget do I need, etc., etc. Not that those are bad, but they should not be prioritized. And I think helping and bringing happiness to others will bring satisfaction to ourselves. Prosperity theology, I want to back up here just a little bit, is often the theology of that if you do good and do right in God's favor, you will be blessed. Mm-hmm. It is taught in a number of denominations and or churches. And I've seen the other side where people have been very, very faithful, and yet seemingly circumstances have led them not to be so fortunate. Mm-hmm. And so consequently, I do not buy into that idea that prosperity theology is why we do what we do as far as sharing and helping and giving. Yeah. The idea of what we need to consider is how we can help and yet give from what we need. And there, again, I want to reemphasize the fact that we need to rely on each other and find confident, trusted people who we can counsel with. And I've had those all throughout my career. Yeah. Even when I was in my early years of work before we were on the farm, and I had it on the farm, and I have it here now, and these people are so extremely valuable to me. Maybe it's partly my personality, but I think we all need each other.
Now, Marvin, you've talked to me about different, what you have called stages of happiness. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share with the congregation, what are those stages of happiness you have talked about with me before?
I think you might be putting up a PowerPoint on this.
Yep.
And I'll just go through it briefly, but I think there were about 7 or 8 power notes here that I had. Put others first, listen, and give consent when asked. I think putting others first is, we've already talked about that, but I think it's important to listen and before we give counsel. I think the temptation of our culture is that, well, if you'd only do this and that, or consider doing this or that, you would be much beneficial for you. And we really need to be asked before we give our counsel. And only you or I can control my happiness. It's not up to someone else. We cannot say, well, because you were such an influence on me, therefore I am the way I am. That's not doable. We're each accountable for our own happiness. And we must listen to ourselves. We have to be aware of what we think and be willing to listen to and take time for ourselves. We need to live below our means if at all possible. Live simply and save for opportunities to help others. And if that's the primary reason for saving, There needs to be other needs that need to be met as far as savings is concerned. But the end ultimate goal for me has been to be able to serve others. And we have, I mentioned earlier, one or two mentors who we can rely on. And one thing I think for my life, I've changed vocation 3 different times. Always fortunate to find other employment when I made those changes. But I think sometimes people feel stuck in a position where they're not content or happy or they don't enjoy it. And if that being the case, make a change. As hard as it may seem sometimes, or work toward making the change first and then implement the change as you can. Also exert self-control and the rewards will come. And I think self-control is important. Do not try to change others. I think sometimes we have the idea of if my spouse or my children or whatever would just think a little differently, or now for us grandchildren, if they just think a little bit differently, it would be much easier. But I think a life lesson in relation to generosity is accepting others where they're at.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to tap into that first little point that you made about giving counsel when you're asked. And I'm going to ask for your counsel. As a 30-something who has developed this relationship with you over the past several years, I have really appreciated learning from you and a lot of our conversation. Perhaps it's because of our mutual interest in the topic, or because of my role at Everence, or what have you, but we talk about personal finance a lot, you and I. And I really appreciate the counsel that you have provided, and learning from you some of the things that you've learned in your journey. As I look to say, well, Marvin has a few decades of more experience than I do. What are the things that Marvin has learned along the way that maybe could help me on my journey? And I wonder if you'd be willing to share now several of the things that you've learned in your experience, personal to your circumstance, but something that we can perhaps all learn from the counsel that we're asking you to give now. So what are a few things that you have learned, particularly in relation to personal finance and your relationship with money?
One of the overriding and points that I would like to emphasize very strongly is that saving consistently as you can, when you can, and being consistent is more important than the amount that you put into that category. I think time has a way of being so on our side, and in financial circles we talk about compound interest. And compound interest is when the interest is added to the principal that has already been put aside, and the interest then is accumulated the following year on both that interest and the principal, and then subsequent years it just continues. It's not rocket science. Investing and putting money together, even though they pay people like Mitch here to help us with this, it's not rocket science. It's just a matter of being, first of all, prioritizing savings and being consistent with savings. And that sums it up. That's it. And you have savings for emergencies that may come up, and you also have savings for retirement or other things that you want to have.
Well, Marvin, I want to thank you for your willingness to sit down and share some of these things with us today. I know that you are not always real quick to put forth some of these things. But I want to tell you the thing that one of the things that I really appreciate about you, and this came up in a conversation you and I had this week, was that as we were talking, you were sharing with me things that you are still learning in terms of how you engage with and interact with others. And the recognition that at your age, there are still things for you to learn is so inspiring to me to take that into my life. This idea that for all of my life, I can continue to learn and continue to grow. And I thank you for being an example of that to me and to the creation, to your family. I am deeply appreciative of that, Marvin.
Thank you.
Marvin, we started our time by naming that you're the recipient of our Regional Journey Award. And as a part of that, Everence wants to give you a small gift of this blessing cup as a representation of a life well lived and generosity to be poured out. So this is a part of that small gift that we want to impart on you as recognition of a life well lived thus far, recognizing that the journey isn't over yet. As an additional part of the Journey Award through Everence, recipients are able to name a charity that Everence will provide a financial gift to based on their recommendation. And Marvin, you chose to designate dollars to be given to Peace Connections here in Newton, specifically to the Circles program. And before any other concluding remarks that you have, I just wonder if you could give folks just a glimpse into Peace Connections and the Circles program and why that's an important cause for you.
Peace Connections, or Circle of Hope, began here in Newton about 8 years ago, and I've been part of it for perhaps the last 6 years. And the significance of the program has been to encourage and be relational with families and individuals who struggle in life, period, not just financially, but in many, many areas of life. And these people are in our community, they're in our midst, and we need to embrace them and give them encouragement and be there for them, not in any other way than to just be relational with those people. And we have a very blessed program here in Newton, and if there are people that hear this and would like to become part of the Circle of Hope, you're invited Tuesday evening to the Methodist Church on Main Street, and we have a meeting and a meal and a fellowship time and an education component with it. So it's been a very valuable experience, and thank you very much for this contribution, and we're more than happy to support Peace Connections and Circle of Hope.
Well, I'll add my thanks on to Derrick's thanks that he provided to you in just being a conversation partner for me. Some folks might not know that much of the role that Marvin had served when you had worked here, I now occupy here at Everence, and so it's been fun to learn some about the job from you, but that shop talk, what started as shop talk, I am really grateful for the friendship that we now share and what I have been able to learn from our experiences together. And so I'll extend my thank you to you as well. And for being willing to share in this setting. I believe that our stories are sacred. Each one of us carries this sacred story, and one way that we can further lean into community together is to share those stories with one another, and I thank you for sharing part of yours in this venue. So, any other concluding remarks that you want to make sure you say in this setting?
Well, I think we pretty well wrapped it up. Thank you.
All right. And that's a wrap.
Thank you for joining us for worship this morning. And thank you to Marvin for your willingness to share with us this morning, your willingness to be vulnerable in this way with us so that we all may learn from you as we walk this journey together. Now, as you go from this worship into your week, may God bless you and keep you. May the very face of Jesus shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Holy Spirit embrace you and give you peace. Go in God's love.